I never expected a librarian's whisper to echo louder than my own heartbeat, but that night, her words changed everything. The library had always been a place of quiet retreat for me. Not just because of the rows of books or the solitude they promised, but because the silence allowed me to breathe. At 24, the world outside felt rushed, loud, and unkind, but here, the echo of turning pages, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, even the faint smell of polished wood and dust, it felt like time slowed down. That night, I lingered longer than usual. Most of the tables were already empty, a few students gathering their things as the clock pushed past closing hours. I thought I'd gone unnoticed, tucked away in the far corner between two shelves of classics. But when I reached for a book, a calm, steady voice floated through the aisle. "Silence is golden," she said gently, her tone both teasing and firm, like a rule recited for the 100th time but softened for just this moment. I turned and saw her, the librarian. She was older than me, though not in a way that dulled her presence. If anything, her years gave her a kind of effortless grace, the sort you couldn't learn from youth. Her hair, dark with threads of silver, was pinned neatly yet not without a few loose strands that framed her face. There was a confidence in the way she stood, arms folded lightly across her chest, but her eyes betrayed something else, curiosity. I smiled, embarrassed, though I wasn't sure what I was guilty of. "I thought I was being quiet," I whispered back. She stepped closer, not with the stiffness of someone enforcing rules, but with the measured ease of someone choosing to linger. "Quieter than most," she admitted, her lips curving into a faint smile. "But still, I notice." The way she said it unsettled me, not in a bad way, but in a way that pressed gently against the silence between us. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she was reminding me of library etiquette, or if she was confessing that she had, in fact, been noticing me. The air seemed denser in that narrow aisle. My fingers brushed the spine of the book I had been reaching for, but I forgot the title completely. She leaned ever so slightly, scanning the shelf as though she were helping me choose, though I could feel the warmth of her presence more than her gaze on the books. "Looking for something particular?" she asked. Her voice carried a low, melodic quality, the kind of sound that could soothe or unsettle depending on the words spoken. I managed to answer, though my throat felt drier than it should have. "Just something worth reading." That earned me a soft laugh, almost like the flutter of a page turning. She tilted her head, considering me with eyes that seemed both playful and searching. "Everything here is worth reading," she said at last, "if you're patient enough to find the story." It wasn't just a librarian's advice, it sounded like something layered, something she might have meant about herself. And for the first time, standing between shelves of worn classics, I realized I was less interested in the book I'd reached for, and more drawn to the quiet mystery of the woman before me. The following evenings became a rhythm I hadn't planned but couldn't resist. After classes or work, I found myself back at the library, almost as if some invisible thread tugged me toward it. Toward her. She was always there, moving quietly between aisles, adjusting books with deliberate care, greeting students with her polite efficiency. But somehow, whenever I stayed, she always seemed to notice. And sometimes, she lingered near me longer than she had to. It was a Wednesday evening when the silence broke again. I was seated near the history section, a stack of heavy books in front of me, most of which I had little real interest in. She approached, her heels soft against the carpet, and slid a book across the table. "You might like this one more," she said casually. I glanced at the cover, a novel, its title laced with themes of longing and patience. The kind of book that didn't just tell a story but asked you to feel it. You think so? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Her lips curved with a hint of mischief. Call it a professional instinct. You don't strike me as someone who thrives on dates and statistics. You're here for something that stirs. The words hung in the air. Something that stirs. It was a strange, almost intimate way to describe what I sought. And yet, she wasn't wrong. I picked up the book, brushing her hand in the process. The touch was brief, accidental, maybe, but there was no denying the warmth of it, no denying the way my chest tightened at the contact. Her fingers lingered a fraction of a second longer than necessary before she pulled back, her composure never faltering. "Thank you," I murmured, unsure whether I meant for the book or for the quiet electricity between us. She leaned lightly against the edge of the table, her presence close but unintrusive. "Reading," she said, her voice low, "isn't about speed. It's about patience. You can't rush a story before it's ready." Her eyes found mine then, holding them with a steadiness that left me both grounded and unsettled. I wondered if she was still talking about the book. I tried to steady myself with humor. "That sounds like a warning. Should I be taking notes?" Her smile widened, soft lines at the corners of her eyes making her expression warmer, more human. "Not a warning," she replied, lowering her tone to something almost conspiratorial. "More like an invitation." The word struck me. Invitation. Not command, not rule, invitation. Around us, the library carried on with its muted life, the soft cough of a student in the far corner, the shuffle of pages turning, the creak of old wood. But between us, the air had its own pulse, a quiet rhythm of glances, pauses, and unspoken words. When she finally pushed away from the table, her fingertips grazed the spine of another book. "I'll let you discover this one on your own," she teased, slipping it beside the first. "But remember, the best stories, they don't reveal themselves all at once." As she walked away, her perfume, subtle, clean, touched with something floral, lingered in the air. I stared at the books in front of me, but my mind wasn't on them. No, my thoughts kept circling back to the way she had looked at me. The way her voice, steady yet suggestive, seemed to carry meaning beyond the words. It was a librarian's job to guide readers to stories. But I couldn't shake the feeling she was guiding me toward something far more dangerous, and far more irresistible. It was one of those evenings when time slipped away unnoticed. The clock above the circulation desk ticked past closing, the library's usual hum fading as students shuffled out with tired faces and heavy backpacks. I had been buried in notes, half reading, half distracted by the memory of her hand-brushing mine days before. When I finally looked up, I realized the place was empty. Empty except for her. She stood near the desk, adjusting a stack of returned books, her posture graceful even in the simplest of tasks. The overhead lights had been dimmed, leaving only the golden pools of desk lamps scattered across the room. The quiet felt different now, heavier, more intimate, as though the library itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it. I began gathering my things in a rush, embarrassed at overstaying. But before I could move, her voice carried softly across the room. "You don't have to leave just yet." I froze, glancing toward her. She wasn't looking at me, at least not directly. She was aligning the corners of the books, her expression calm, but her words carried a weight that suggested choice. permission, maybe even invitation. I'm keeping you, I said quietly, almost apologetically. Her eyes lifted, finally meeting mine. I don't mind. Those 3 words seemed to erase the walls between us. I sat back down slowly, the wooden chair creaking under me. She crossed the room, her steps unhurried, the faint sound of her heels muffled by the carpet. When she reached my table, she rested her hand on the chair opposite me, considering whether to sit. Long day, she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded. Longer than I wanted. But this makes it easier. She tilted her head, studying me as though she were searching for the truth between my words. Then she sat, folding her hands loosely on the table. The light from the lamp painted her face in warm tones, softening the fine lines near her eyes, making her presence feel almost unreal. What about you? I asked, my voice lower than I expected. Does it ever get lonely here? Her breath caught, just for a second. She looked down, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the table. Sometimes, she admitted. It's a quiet job. People think quiet means peace. But quiet can also mean absence. Her honesty surprised me. For the first time, I saw something beneath her professional composure, a flicker of vulnerability. And it stirred something inside me. I don't hear absence, I said softly. Not when you're here. The silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. Our knees brushed under the table, a fleeting contact that neither of us moved to break. The warmth of it lingered, stronger than I wanted to admit. She let out a breath, almost a laugh but quieter, like she was steadying herself. You're very observant, she murmured, her gaze holding mine. I swallowed, pulse quickening. I notice what matters. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The library seemed to vanish, no ticking clock, no books, no shadows, just the 2 of us suspended in that fragile, charged space. And though the world outside kept spinning, in here it felt like we were the only story still being written. The following week, the library was quieter than ever. Rain had driven most students away early, leaving only a handful of scattered readers. I sat at the same table as before, a few books spread open but unread. My mind wasn't on them. It was on her. She moved between aisles with that same graceful ease, never hurried, always precise. But tonight, she glanced my way more often, as if she felt the weight of my eyes on her. And maybe she did. When she finally approached, she carried nothing in her hands, no books, no pretense. She stopped beside my chair, tilting her head just enough for a loose strand of hair to fall across her cheek. You know, she began softly, you're not as quiet as you think. I looked up at her, caught off guard. I've been sitting here in silence for nearly an hour. Her lips curved into that restrained smile I'd come to recognize, the one that said she was holding something back. She leaned closer, placing her palm lightly on the edge of the table, her perfume carrying faint notes of something floral, clean, almost intoxicating. You laughed earlier, she reminded me. Out loud. At a line in your book. I chuckled nervously. I didn't think anyone heard. Her eyes glimmered, a playful spark hidden within their calm surface. She leaned even closer now, her voice lowering to a whisper that felt meant only for me. I heard. And in here, her breath brushed against my cheek. Silence is golden. I swallowed, unsure if the tension tightening my chest was fear or something else entirely. Then, after the smallest pause, her lips so close I could feel the warmth of her words, she added, "Unless you want me louder." The air shifted. The library's vast stillness suddenly felt too small, too fragile to hold the weight of her words. My pulse raced, echoing louder than the rain tapping at the tall windows. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I only watched her, my breath shallow, her nearness unraveling every line I'd drawn in my mind. Was it a joke? A tease meant to catch me off guard? Or was it something else, a slip of honesty wrapped in playful disguise? Her expression gave nothing away. She straightened slowly, her hand brushing against mine on the table as if by accident. That touch, light, fleeting, sent a shiver through me, grounding me even as it left me reeling. I tried to speak, to respond, but the words tangled in my throat. All I managed was a quiet, "I don't know if I could handle you louder." Her laugh came then, soft, controlled, but threaded with something deeper. Not ridicule, not dismissal. More like recognition. She stepped back, just far enough to break the closeness, but not so far that the pull between us disappeared. Her eyes lingered on me, steady, searching. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the nearest aisle, her figure slipping between the shelves like a secret waiting to be discovered. I sat frozen, the weight of her whisper still burning in my ear, the challenge lingering in my chest. And for the first time, I wondered if she wanted me to chase the sound of her voice, even if it meant breaking the silence we both pretended to protect. The days after her whispered tease felt different. Each visit to the library carried a charge, an invisible current running beneath the silence. We spoke less in words and more in glances, the kind of glances that lingered a second too long, carrying questions neither of us dared to voice. One evening, the weather shifted suddenly. Dark clouds gathered over the city, thunder rumbling in the distance. By the time I arrived, rain lashed against the tall windows of the library, streaking the glass with silver. The storm seemed to empty the building of visitors. Only a few determined students braved the weather before leaving early, until at last it was just the two of us again. She was at the front desk, sorting through papers. Though her eyes flicked up when I entered, a flash of surprise quickly softened into something warmer. I offered a smile, shaking droplets of rain from my jacket. "Storm caught you, too?" she asked, her voice carrying across the cavernous room. "Or maybe it brought me here," I replied, half joking but not entirely. Her lips curved, but she didn't respond. Instead, she gestured toward the lamplit tables. "You may as well stay a while. It doesn't look like it'll ease up soon." So I stayed. We sat at the same table, though this time, she joined me without hesitation. The storm outside became a soundtrack, steady rainfall against glass, occasional rumbles of thunder echoing in the distance. Between us, the silence was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with things we weren't yet brave enough to say. She pushed a book toward me, one I hadn't noticed her carry. "This one," she said, her tone softer than before, "is about longing. People waiting for what they think they can't have." I studied her face instead of the cover. The way her hair had loosened slightly from its pin, a few strands curling gently near her temples. The way her eyes, usually composed, seemed brighter under the golden lamp. "You think I'd relate?" I asked carefully. Her gaze met mine, steady but unguarded. "Don't you?" The question lingered, daring me to answer. My throat tightened, my words refusing to surface. Instead, I let my hand rest on the edge of the table, close enough to hers that the space between felt like an invitation. Lightning flared through the windows, illuminating her profile for a split second. The scent of rain drifted inside through the small crack of an old windowpane, mingling with the faint trace of her perfume. She shifted slightly, her knee brushing mine beneath the table. Neither of us moved away. For a long while, we said nothing. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was alive. Every breath, every stolen glance, every accidental touch was charged with the weight of unspoken words. I thought of reaching for her hand, of breaking the barrier between us. But something stopped me, not fear, exactly, but a recognition that what we had in this moment was fragile. Too fragile to shatter with a rushed move. She turned back to her book, though I noticed the faintest smile tugging at her lips. And in that quiet, with the storm raging around us, I realized the ache of waiting could be just as powerful as the touch itself. The storm deepened as night fell. Rain hammered harder against the tall windows, and thunder rolled so closely that the glass panes seemed to shiver. I sat across from her at the table, the golden glow of the desk lamp wrapping us in a small circle of warmth. We had been reading, or pretending to, for nearly an hour when the inevitable happened. The lights went out. The entire library plunged into darkness, leaving only the sound of the storm and the sudden awareness of our breaths. For a moment, I froze, my fingers pressed against the closed pages of my book. Then I heard her voice. Calm, low, steady. Stay here. I'll get the lantern. Her footsteps moved away, a faint rhythm against the carpeted floor. In the distance, a drawer opened, and after a quiet shuffle, a small flame bloomed. The soft glow of a lantern spread slowly, chasing the shadows into the corners of the room. She carried it back to our table, setting it down between us. The lantern light was different from the electric lamps, warmer, softer, more intimate. It painted her features in golden amber, her skin glowing, her eyes reflecting the flicker like dark water catching firelight. She sat down again, but this time, closer. Our chairs angled slightly toward one another, the small circle of light narrowing the space until it felt like the rest of the library, the rest of the world, had disappeared. Power will be out for a while, she murmured. Storms like this always win. I nodded, though my thoughts were far from the storm. I watched the way her hands rested on the table, fingers loosely clasped, the faint tremor in them betraying nerves she rarely let show. Without meaning to, I asked, doesn't it ever get heavy? Being the one who's always composed? Her lips parted slightly, as if my words had caught her off guard. She looked down at the lantern, its flame shifting in the glass. For a long pause, she didn't answer. Then, finally, she spoke. Yes. Her voice cracked ever so slightly. Sometimes it feels like I've lived my life in whispers. Polite. Careful. Always measured. And then you came along, and suddenly, she trailed off, exhaling slowly, as if admitting it cost her something. Suddenly silence feels too heavy. The confession hit me harder than I expected. My chest tightened, my pulse pounding in my ears. I leaned in, my hand reaching instinctively across the table. My fingertips brushed against hers, tentative at first, then firmer when she didn't pull away. Her eyes lifted to mine, wide and vulnerable. I've been trying not to say this, I whispered, my voice unsteady, because I didn't want to cross a line. But the truth is, I notice you. More than I should. More than I can stop. Her hand turned under mine, her palm pressing against my skin. The warmth of her touch spread through me, grounding and electrifying all at once. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across her face, but her eyes never wavered. "You make me feel louder," she said softly, almost trembling. And I didn't think I needed that. Not anymore. The storm outside raged on, but inside, everything had gone quiet, except for the sound of two hearts daring, finally, to be heard. The storm finally began to ease, its roar softening into a steady drizzle. The power flickered back once, then twice, before the lamps buzzed to life again. But by then, the mood in the library had already changed. We stayed by the lantern longer than we needed to, either of us willing to break the fragile space we'd created. Her hand still rested in mine, the silence around us no longer heavy, but alive. Charged. When at last she pulled back, it wasn't with rejection. It was with care. She smoothed her hair back, collecting herself, though her eyes betrayed the weight of everything she'd just admitted. "I should close up," she said quietly, though the words felt more like a gentle reminder than a dismissal. I stood slowly, gathering my things. The hush of the library wrapped around us one last time, familiar yet different now, no longer the sterile quiet of rules and order, but the kind of silence that followed something deeply understood. At the door, she reached for her coat, draping it over her shoulders with unhurried grace. I held the door open, the night air rushing in cool and damp. The scent of rain filled the space, fresh and grounding. We stepped outside together. The world looked new, the pavement slick with reflections, streetlights glimmering in puddles, the air washed clean. She paused just beyond the doorway, tilting her face slightly upward as if to feel the lingering drizzle on her skin. "It's strange," she murmured, "how everything smells different after rain. Like the earth finally exhales." I watched her, the way her hair caught the glow of the street lamp, the way her voice softened as though she were letting me glimpse something private. "Or maybe it's us that changes," I offered. "Maybe we notice more." She turned toward me then, and the look in her eyes was one I'd never forget, steady, searching, tinged with something like fear, but also a quiet surrender. For a moment, I wanted to close the distance, to wrap my arm around her, to claim what felt inevitable. But something in her expression stopped me. Not rejection, but restraint. A wisdom I couldn't ignore. Instead, she slipped her hand through the crook of my arm, a gesture so simple yet impossibly intimate. "Some stories," she said softly, "aren't meant to be rushed. They're meant to be read slowly, page by page." We began walking down the rain-slick street together, our steps unhurried. The night air was cool against my skin, the world hushed in a way that made me feel like we were the only two people left outside. Her arm linked with mine, warm and certain, and I felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation. We didn't need to decide what came next. Not tonight. What mattered was the quiet certainty between us, a promise unspoken, a story still unfolding. As we turned the corner, she glanced up at me with the faintest smile. And though the silence stretched, I realized I no longer feared it. Because with her beside me, silence wasn't absence. It was possibility.